Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part now for the 14th of March 2025. The lights are working, they're not tripping after my son overfilled the bath and it came through the light fixture onto my head in the middle of a live interview with Scott Lucas a week or so ago. And today's the first time they're not tripping the whole electricity circuit for the downstairs. So that's good news. Lots to talk about today in all the various videos I'm going to be doing. There's quite a lot of geopolitics to talk, as I didn't do a geopolitics update yesterday, did breaking news updates and whatnot instead. We'll go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find those descriptions in the video below. Just to remind you, I am still wearing Canadian apparel. I was even wearing a Canadian t-shirt yesterday. That's every day bar one for the last, I don't know, 10 days now or so, something like that. Canada. 1,410 personnel lost in a single day. That is an uptick there. Interesting move in that category. 6 tanks lost. That's an uptick, but still below the daily average. 11 troop-carrying AFVs, just about half the daily average. 46 artillery systems as a tick upwards in that category. About double the daily average, and 114 vehicles and fuel tanks lost, which is fairly substantial there. What do I have to say about these figures? It's difficult to make any conclusions from here. It is worth knowing that Kursk, I think there are more views coming out now that Kursk was a bit of a disaster in terms of the last week or so. Having to pull out there, you are going to see a lot of, I think, captured equipment and POWs. Unfortunately, it was a real rushed effort. There will be huge amount of, I think, probably ammo and all sorts left behind. Howitzers, things like that, you can't tow out quickly, especially when your supply lines are being absolutely hammered. So I think, that might affect Ukrainian losses going forward. Let's see Andrew Perpetua's loss list. He has another one out today, which is fantastic news. Good to see him back doing the things that we so much appreciate here. And you can see this is a massive list of equipment, heavily skewing on the Russian side to civilian vehicles and ATVs that make it look very, very advantageous for the Ukrainians. But actually in combat, asset losses is about the same. Otherwise, it's about a 3-to-1 loss ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses. Let's start with the Ukrainian losses, see if there's anything we can make of this. Front end loader, engineering vehicle damage. We've got a number of bits of artillery, mainly 2 S1 Grodzikas, which is interesting. Saw a couple of them yesterday. I think 1 Bogdana destroyed there and a Caesar destroyed. That's going to hurt. That's a very capable piece of kit that the French are providing and continue to provide. News that the Swedes are going to provide some more archers, which is good news there. And as I said yesterday, I explained at length that you will see more and more Bogdanas on these lists because they are producing more and more of them. And so they will take up a larger proportion of the artillery that the Ukrainians have. In terms of tanks, we've got Leopard 185 destroyed, another one. That's the second one this week, I think, or since we've been looking at the loss list again, so in 3 days, I guess. T-64 and the T-72 damage there. A couple of infantry fighting vehicles, just BMPs, quite a few APCs, MRATs and IMVs, and I'm fairly sure that this will have a lot to do with Kursk. In fact, the captured Kirpi there is probably going to be something to do with Kursk. Did the Turks just announce some more Kirpis going to Ukraine? Anyway, we've got a Bushmaster, Australian provided vehicle, that's destroyed. Another abandoned Kirpi, Kozak destroyed, and a Max Pro damaged. And then a number of different infantry mobility vehicles and APCs, both destroyed and damaged, including Striker, a number of M113s damaged, Humvees, Bats, those are American provided ones. That are the basis for the German provided ones. That they took that and then they upgraded them. So when you see a BAT UMG, I don't know whether that would be actually the German provided vehicle, or is the German provided one, was that not an MRAP? I don't know. Anyway, confusing myself here. But anyway, quite a lot of kit here in those kind of AFV categories, and fair amount of civilian vehicles as well thrown in for good measure. Just over half of them destroyed. When we go to the Russian kit, let's look at the destroyed against damaged. And we can see that Ukrainian in the combat assets about 50-50. Russians in the combat assets, when you're in the tank and IFVs, most of them destroyed there. And then, more destroyed in the civilian vehicles than the Ukrainians as a proportion. But not too dissimilar, to be perfectly honest. Right, let's go and look at what the Russians have lost, and we can see straight away there's an air defense system, a book, another one destroyed there. So good news for the Ukrainians. We have, in terms of artillery, a number of D-30s and a few other bits and pieces. Worth noting that the M48 that we saw yesterday, as Thierry pointed out, wasn't an artillery piece; it's an anti-tank gun, and really has a range of about sort of 1,500 meters. So the fact that they're using a 1950s anti-tank gun, probably for indirect fire, I would assume, is very revealing in itself. Anyway, tanks, all of these destroyed or abandoned. We have a captured infantry fighting vehicle, BMP-2 there. A whole bunch of other BMPs destroyed. So that's a good, as I mentioned earlier, a good proportion, a good ratio there of destroyed, captured and abandoned against damaged. And then in AFE, APCs and IMV categories, fair number of vehicles there, but not too bad. And then just an awful lot of ATVs. Yet again, these quads are being taken out 10 a penny at the moment. Quite a few trucks. And then a vast amount of civilian vehicles, cars. We've got bukankas. Those are what are called loafs. And then, as Andrew does, he differentiates the different types of loafs. There are party loafs. There are flatbed loafs. There's a flatbread truck, so on and so forth. It's interesting that there were, and this was reported in the Institute for the Study of War, observations from the Ukrainians that the Russians are using more of these sorts of vehicles, in particularly the Prokhovsk area, indicating that there is actually a fundamental lack of, that was the implication, I think, very much so, fundamental lack of military equipment there. So I think the Russians are getting to a stage, like we've been saying for a long time, where they're really struggling to get the requisite equipment to the front lines. Now, yet again, as I said yesterday, and I've already said today, you're going to see more and more Ukrainian captured kit. Here's another M777, third one already. This one has an awful lot of ammunition with it. And if you're talking about all of that ammunition, they're so desperate to get to the front lines in Ukraine, and then you lose all that due to a fairly disastrous scenario developing in Kursk, then that's a real kick in the teeth for the Ukrainians there. Seems like a whole artillery position was simply abandoned. And you can imagine that. Like, you've got the logistics of getting all of this stuff out there, you know, when you've got literally probably hours to skedaddle, it's not going to happen. You are just going to leave that all there. That is the nature of more dynamic fronts or a collapse in a particular front. So yeah, real shame for the Ukrainians. Real shame there. Now, that fire, the CHP-16, the Moscow combined heating plants, I don't know, I still don't know whether it's hit by drone or there's a fire coming from inside. I think it's probably a fire coming from inside. But this is great for Ukraine. That was growing yesterday. I don't know the outcome here. This is the last I saw of it, and this was going back to yesterday morning. But yeah, the roof of the thermal power plant is on fire here. Thick black smoke pouring out of the building. Firefighters are trying to get to the scene of the emergency, but they weren't allowed originally because of restricted areas, and struggled because there were low piping that meant that they couldn't use the equipment they needed to be able to use to get to areas they needed to. So yeah, a bit of a disaster going on there. Combined heat and power plant. That's what CHP is. News just coming out now, and I don't know too much about this guy. I don't really know how to interpret this, but Ukrainian activist Demyan Ganul has been shot dead in central Odessa. He's a prominent 31-year-old activist known for his nationalist views and leadership of the Street Front organization. Shooter fled the scene. This chap's sister, the guy that was shot, revealed he'd been receiving constant threats due to his patriotic stance and activism. In response to the assassination, Interior Minister has dispatched a special investigative team from the National Police to Odessa and assumed personal oversight in the investigation. So this is quite a major thing. But I don't, he's a bit of a controversial figure, so I don't know. It could have been a personal vendetta, it could have been political retaliation. So his outspoken nationalist stance may have made him a target for opposing political factions or foreign adversaries seeking to destabilize nationalist elements within Ukraine. So you can argue it's like Putin or political forces within Ukraine, or a personal vendetta. Is involved in controversial actions such as confronting individuals critical of Ukrainian military efforts. Could have led to a personal grudge culminating in violence. Criminal elements, his activism might have intersected with organised crime interests. I mean, that's speculation, especially if his actions threatened their operations, leading to possible retribution. But yeah, we'll have to see how that unfolds. Right, on to distant strikes. Very few drones sent in last night. Now, we heard the other night that a drone manufacturing facility was hit. A warehouse at an airport was hit. That could have been a drone warehouse. I don't know if this is affecting a severe drop. I mean, we've been seeing 100 to 200 drones sent every night. When you are seeing 27 sent, then that is a massive, massive drop, and something must underwrite that, because as I say all the time, you would if you could, you aren't so you can't. They would send 150 drones if they could. They didn't, so I presume they couldn't. 27 drones are said, 16 taken out conventionally, 9 taken out by electronic warfare, which is 25, leaving 2 to get through, which is a vast improvement on other nights, but then far fewer drones sent in. We heard that Moscow was already going on to Ukrainian efforts into Russia last night and occupied territories. Moscow was not immune to Ukraine's drones either, although it seems Russia's air defense had more than a helping hand in giving residents in Balashikha in Moscow region an early morning wake-up call. Soon afterwards, telltale signs of Pantsir air defense work were found strewn on the street of Balashikha, where the drone fell. Either the drone or Russia's own missile fell on an apartment block, damaging the roof in the town and Moscow region. Now, this isn't exactly widespread attacks on Moscow. This will be a shot across the bow. This will be more to mess around with the, I think, Muscovite psyche there. And this is an announcement to the people of Moscow, the people of Russia. Second day in a row that Ukraine has attacked Moscow, not just refineries. Drones reach the heart of Russia again. A drone hit an elite residential complex in Moscow. Possibly the drone was suppressed by electronic warfare and took its own route. I think that's highly likely. We know that there's massive amounts of electronic warfare and jamming going on in Moscow, and has been for some time. I think it's going to be very hard for a drone to find its true target in Moscow these days. Sorry, tea break. Right, moving on. Saratov, Engels Air Base there, was yet again targeted. This is a very important air base where a lot of Russian planes take off from, VKS planes, they're Russian Air Force planes. And we've seen it targeted before, Saratov, Engels 2. This time, attacked by a number of drones with possibly 2 successful hits near the airport, says PS01. The attack was ongoing for an hour, so maybe quite a few drones sent against Saratov. We don't know much else other than, that's the wrong one, other than the airport was closed this morning still, I believe. Yeah, here we go. So temporary restrictions on takeoff and landing have been introduced at Saratov Airport. I presume that's the non-military airport. Rosaviatsia reported the air alarm is sounding due to Ukrainian drone danger. Now, if you remember, there were attacks on Saratov yesterday. I'm going to actually forward one to this. I showed you this yesterday, a drone coming down in the Saratov region. Intel sources say 2 gas compressor stations were struck, possibly then, when that was attacked yesterday. 2 gas facilities were also hit in the Tambov region. I don't know, and this one in Saratov, I don't know if that is 2 nights ago or last night. Yeah. Anyway, in addition, Ukrainian intel says its drone struck a missile depot in Belgorod. The site near Radkovka in the Belgorod region stored S-300 and S-400 ammunition. In fact, we are hearing the SBU confirming that their drone struck these 2 compressor stations, gas compressor stations, and a missile depot for those S-300 and S-400 systems. Drones hit Davidovskaya in Tambov and Novopetrovskaya in Saratov, the gas stations there. They also targeted that S-300, S-400 system depot. I don't know if that's for the systems themselves, because that's what's intimated here, or whether that's a depot for the missiles, but that was in the Belgorod region. And then really the big one that most people are sharing today is a drone attack on the Russia's Tuapse oil refinery, which has happened before. This has been targeted a number of times. Down on the coast, I think it is, on the Black Sea. Over 10 explosions were heard at the local Tuapse oil refinery, and a fire of 1,000 square meters plus has been spreading. Indeed, that's what it looked like last night. Sanctions into Tuapse, so those are Ukrainian oil sanctions. And that's what it looks like this morning, so still burning pretty heavily there. I don't know if, there's any news on that strike since then, but that seems to have been a fairly successful one. So good news for the Ukrainians there. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. Russian deep reconnaissance groups are trying to enter Sumy region almost along the entire border. That's according to the head of Sumy. Now the enemy troops have pulled up serious reserves there. There will be a high intensity of shelling. Defense Council made a decision to evacuate 543 people from 8 settlements. This is a worry. So where Ukraine have done pretty well, or are doing pretty well, right across the front line in the east, the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians largely out of the Kursk sector, where they were, very quickly, and they've amassed a massive bunch of forces up there that has enabled them to do that. They've used an awful lot of artillery. Multiple launch rocket systems have apparently been pummeling the Ukrainians, and some very effective drone teams as well. If they continue with that momentum, this could be very challenging for the Ukrainians. Russians, on the other hand, are saying themselves on the socials, pinch of salt, just one opinion, we should not think now about some vague truce, but about the fact that Ukrainian armed forces, having freed up forces from the Kursk region, will begin to actively counterattack in other directions. I don't know. I think they're going to be worried about those attacks from into Sumy. We should also not forget about the accumulated reserves, which Syrskyi's not used anywhere, but continues to arm and train in preparation for the spring-summer campaign. We have every reason to believe that Ukrainian armed forces will definitely go on the offensive this summer. And that's an interesting idea. We've heard a lot about these reserves that haven't been used. We're expecting them to be used really relatively recently, but they haven't. So these counters could just be with existing forces. There may have been some rotations and whatnot, but there is all this mystery surrounding quite how many reserve forces the Ukrainians actually have. Okay, let's go on. Russians increase pressure on Tourette's, because this is where the Ukrainians are doing particularly well. They're redeploying additional forces from other directions to there, say the Ukrainians. Artillery attacks exceed 100 daily. Assault groups growing from 2 to 4 to 10 soldiers using motorcycles for mobility. That is a worry for the Ukrainians, as they've got the wind behind their sails there. Okay, Euromaidan Press reports that a Russian saboteur has been charged with arson in an attack on a Polish building store. A Belarusian national has been indicted for setting fire to a store in 2024, allegedly working for Russian intelligence. Thank you very much, Ivan. With the operations footage later used in Russian propaganda. This just goes to show how the tendrils of Russian influence and hybrid warfare activity spread around the world, how effective they are at doing stuff like this. So good that he has been indicted there. Now, the Trump effect, says Noel reports. Trump claims Ukrainians no longer support Zelensky, but the numbers tell a different story. A new Economist poll shows 72% of Ukrainians approve of Zelensky's performance, far higher than Trump's 46% in the US. So there is an irony there. There's a huge hypocrisy, really, when Trump is talking about how low Zelensky's ratings are, and they are almost double that. Well, they're almost double that, but they're massively higher than Trump's own ratings. Now, this is unsurprising, but deeply worrying still. So the Kremlin rejected Trump's Ukraine-Russia envoy Keith Kellogg from peace talks, calling him, quote, too close to Ukraine and, quote, not our kind of person, according to NBC. Kellogg was absent from key summits as Putin seeks negotiators of a different, quote, caliber. Now, what we have here is the Russians dictating to the Americans what should happen in the peace negotiations, and the Americans capitulating. That's absolutely incredible that the Russians would be able to say to the Americans, oh, this guy that's negotiating with us, we don't like him. So can you get rid of him? And the Americans go, yeah, all right. Yeah, we'll do that. So we are now hearing that, he was removed from peace negotiations at Russia's request due to his overly pro-Ukrainian stance. That's absolute capitulation to the demands of Russia. And it gives you a real indication of how the Americans are going about this. In fact, this pretty much sums it all up. This is America bending over backwards to agree with Russian demands. And in fact, giving away those demands even before the negotiations. This is the National Security Advisor Mike Walls speaking to Sean Hannity on Fox News.
If I were to imagine how this deal unfolds, it's going to be the rare earth mineral deal, a component that keeps U.S. involvement and a presence in Ukraine. Maybe European troops can be in Ukraine as well. I would imagine that Ukraine being a part of NATO is not going to happen, and I would imagine parts, maybe the Donbass region in particular, or areas that are heavily populated by people from Russia, that would go to Putin in any negotiated settlement. Am I wrong in my conjecture here?
I'd imagine, realistically, no to Ukraine and NATO and minerals deal, and Russia gets to keep Donbass. I mean, we'll start with that. Am I there or thereabouts? Yeah, you're there. Yeah, that's pretty much the American approach. Okay, happy days.
Sean, no surprise, you're not wrong in any of that. And what's important is...
Oh, Sean, you're always so right. Oh, I do love you, Sean. Oh, Shawny. Oh, it's nice to be on Fox when nobody gives me any shit. Oh, I can just say what I like. Oh, Shawny.
Conjecture here?
Sean, no surprise, you're not wrong in any of that. And what's important is that we are discussing all of those things with both sides. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Russians. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Ukrainians.
Nice.
And we are pushing both sides together with President Trump, the deal maker in chief.
The deal maker in chief, or as I like to say, chief capitulator. Right, okay, so Anton Gerashenko reports on Steve Witkoff's visit to Moscow, and the spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov's statements. So these are some bullet points. Putin received US Special Envoy to the Middle East and to Russia now, Stephen Witkoff, late last night, and passed information and additional signals for Trump through him. There are reasons for cautious optimism regarding the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. Russia has received additional information from the US on Ukraine. Oh, that's nice. Oh, so the US is giving information on Ukraine to Russia. That's awfully kind of them. Putin supports Trump's position on resolving the conflict in Ukraine, but has voiced questions that need to be answered jointly. Both Russia and the US realise that a conversation between Putin and Trump is needed. Of course you realise that, because that is a realisation that Putin will take advantage of Trump. And that's basically what both sides want. The exact time of the conversation between Trump and Putin hasn't yet been agreed upon. Russia is waiting for foreign investors. The domestic market is open to them. Putin will hold a conversation with Maduro, that's a Venezuelan leader, on Friday in honor of the 80th anniversary of the Moscow-Caracas diplomatic relations. Putin has a meeting with permanent members of the Security Council and an international phone call scheduled for Friday. Whoop-de-doo. Right. Now, Zelensky's answer to this, what do we have? So, Zelensky's accused the Russian president of manipulative response to the US proposal for a ceasefire, saying Putin pretended to accept it. At the moment, he is in fact preparing to reject it. That's a quote. Continuing the quote, that's why in Moscow they are surrounding the ceasefire idea with such preconditions that it either fails or gets dragged out for as long as possible. Putin does this often. He doesn't say no outright, but he drags things out and makes reasonable solutions impossible. Exactly. He knows Putin. US President Donald Trump has acknowledged that while Putin's response was promising, it was also incomplete. Getting to the bottom of what Putin actually wants and planning what to do next in response will be the focus of the next few days. US Special Envoy Witkoff was in Moscow last night, where he was meant to meet with Putin or senior Russian officials to discuss the proposals. As of this morning, neither the Kremlin nor the White House issued any readouts from their discussion. Speaking on Fox News overnight, the US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz praised the Ukrainians for, quote, a very different approach than you saw in the Oval Office, and has urged all sides to move to ceasefire. He declined to go into details of discussions Witkoff had in Moscow, but insisted there were some cautious optimism as the US administration expects to hear back from Witkoff, quote, to evaluate and for the president to make decisions on next steps. When it was put to him that Ukraine not be allowed to enter NATO and would probably have to give up some Russian-occupied territories in Donbass, Waltz said, you are not wrong in any of that. What's important is that we are discussing all of those things with both sides, as we just heard. Given public comments from Ukrainian officials on the integrity of the Ukrainian territory, it's difficult to imagine their enthusiasm for such a proposal. On Saturday, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will host a virtual meeting of leaders involved in the planning of the Coalition of the Willing, a follow-up to his Lancaster House summit earlier this month. Kremlin repeats this is coming out just now, line on cautious optimism on a ceasefire, and that's just going to be the rhetoric to string this out, I would have thought. When Mr. Witkoff brings all the information to President Trump, we will determine the timing of a conversation between Trump and Putin, said Peskov. There is an understanding on all sides that such a conversation is needed. There are reasons to be cautiously optimistic. Oh dear. There you go. And so on and so forth. Lots more to talk about, but we get to that later in the geopolitical video. Now, just a few things to end on. First of all, this is some, I presume, purposeful trolling by, interestingly, both Danish and Swedish news television coverage of the Putin, Lukashenko, Putin-Lukashenko on top. That's where they met and were talking about ceasefire potentials there, and the one below is Putin in Kursk, and we're going to talk about that in a second, because you can see already in that picture that these are two different Putins. Two different Putins. There's no doubt about that. Look at the thinness of this guy's face and the wideness of this guy's face. But the point of this photo is that a screenshot of the TV channels is one's, as I said, Danish, one's Swedish. Both call Putin the president of the USA. Now, that can't just be a coincidence where they make that mistake twice. But, wow, that is ultimate trolling. President of the USA, Vladimir Putin. Oof. But that is kind of how people feel in Europe. Now, these two Putins, this is the same day this kind of came out. Or I think he did that yesterday, but these photos were, released on the same day, and they're at most sort of 24 hours apart in chronology. This is a wide-faced, smooth-skinned Putin, and this isn't. Those are two different Putins. I've got no doubt about that. Look at the wider face. Some people say this is the kind of Eastern Provinces Putin, with the eyes that are much closer to, much more closed and whatnot. Just look at this Putin coming in. So that's that Putin. And then we see this Putin going to Kursk. I don't know. I'm pretty sure, and I know I've been through this before, and there's been analyses on this. I'm pretty sure these are different Putins, but there you go. Anyway, I'll leave that up to you to decide and cast your opinion on in the threads below. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, everybody, and speak to you soon. Don't forget that we are doing a NAFO fundraiser at the moment, and we are presently a whopping 55% through. I think someone donated 12,000 Canadian dollars yesterday. Absolutely insane. So thank you on behalf of myself, Rick, the Ukrainian, and Roman Trokimets for that. Whoever that was, I haven't looked into that yet. It might be one of Rick's followers there, but whoever it was, thank you. My good Canadian friends. Hey, awesome. Yeah, that's a worthwhile fundraiser, as all NAFO ones are. 4 vehicles, 3 trucks and 1 minivan, and we have 2 patches, a joint patch and also a single patch for my side of things, single patch for Rick's side of things there. So awesome source. Really appreciate all of your support there. Chris from Clockwork Design, go and check out his design work, is amazing. He and JR put that together, so thank you guys. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.